Hello and welcome to Radio Writeoff. I'm Quill Scratch.
I'm not a hat.
I'm Dubs Rewatcher.
And we are talking today about the Writeoff True Colors. So, excuse me.
No worries. I think I don't know about Dubs, but I know
we all
Cass
have...
and I are a little bit ill tonight. So.
Yes, I definitely have a cold. So we did pretty well this round. We got like 21 stories, and it seemed like a prompt people liked in general. We got some interesting art submissions too, which is neat. It's been a pretty fun round all told, I think.
I thought this prompt was perfectly average.
Mm-hmm.
In 2 months, I don't think people are going to remember it very well. But you know, it's made some good stories. I wasn't too impressed with the art this round, personally. Usually, I'm like really enthralled with the art. Like I fall in love with at least one. I didn't say it. I think we had good entries. I'm talking about the prompt itself. I usually I'm like really enthralled with at least one art piece.
Mm-hmm.
Like I fall in love with it, and I will die for it.
Sure.
But there was nothing like that this round.
Now we've got, for people listening in later, we've got people in chat yelling at Dubs for what he just said. This is why the audience is muted in the Writeoff in the podcast channel.
There are so many reasons.
Yes.
Yeah, the art this round was interesting because this is the second round we've tried to do overlapping art and writing times.
Yep, I think so.
I think there's been a notable drop in art because of that.
Yeah, as predicted.
Which is a tad shame because I, despite my very much outspoken, not an art critic nature, I enjoy the art rounds. I think they're a lot of fun, and I enjoy looking at all the stuff that people create. So it's kind of sad when we have less.
I personally prefer the way they used to be. I like the old format because as is. I mean, I like doing both stories and art. But at least with this weekend, I felt like I spent so much time and effort on my story that it only left me with one day to do the art. And by that time, I felt like it was too late to really put any good effort in.
Well, I believe the plan is not to entirely remove the other style of do art and then do story things. I think we're still going to have that a couple times a year. But we'll see how that goes, I guess. Excuse me.
That said, brief shout out to the beautiful comments on analysis arguing about the x-axis.
Yeah.
That made my day reading through those.
I did kind of see that coming when I saw there was no label on it.
I have analysis 3rd out of 5th in my slate.
Okay.
Behind Colorblind, which was the nice watercolor piece, and When You Wish, which I believe was the comic.
Yeah, When You Wish was good. I liked When You Wish.
I was a little uncertain about that one. Like, do we need to have rules on how much text is allowed in...
I don't think so.
No?
Nah.
I mean, what if people just, like... Well...
Anarchy! Fewer rules the better!
What, write 2,000 words in a fucking art piece?
What if people just start submitting comics?
I'm okay with that.
I mean, I think that's still
comics.
art.
Comics are good.
Yeah, but, like, is that... Okay. I mean, I guess we'll have to see if people do it, you know?
Anyway, shall we talk about the stories? The things that we're actually here to talk about?
We probably should. Yeah, so we picked 4 stories, and I think the first one we were going to talk about was Garmonbozia, or Garmonbozia. I don't... Creamed corn. I don't know how to pronounce this thing, but apparently it's creamed corn. Probably because they were shooting a television show and they needed something cheap.
That makes sense.
But that's just my guess.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Well, I have not read this one unless I wrote it, which is possible.
Probably did. But yes.
So, Had and I have had an interesting bit of discussion about this before the podcast. It's one of the reasons we were a little late starting, is that we got quite animated in our discussion of this.
The other one was buses, but we couldn't have done anything about that.
So we just argued.
Fuck buses. Fuck the Livingston transit system.
You know, buses and Dubs have had a rocky relationship when it comes to Radio Writeoff.
The Livingston transit system sucks.
But we're talking about Garmonbozia. Anyways, something about creamed corn.
Yes.
Yes, Quill and I had something of a disagreement about this. I felt that it was not holding up as a story. I wasn't like because it's obviously some sort of dual fan fiction, right? Like, so it's obviously My Little Pony, but then it's also like whatever, it's Twin Peaks, I believe, whatever Garmonbozia is from. It's also Twin Peaks, and like I read it and I just was not feeling it. I don't feel like it used the Twin Peaks stuff in a way that was accessible to me, you know. And Quill, okay, now you can tell what you felt about it, Quill.
I'm giggling at chat. I think I enjoyed this story, and I think before we go any further, I think it's important to say neither of us really knows anything about Twin Peaks. Is that right? Yeah,
yes, that is important.
Yeah. So, disclaimer, neither of us knows what the fuck we're talking about. But I really enjoyed what this story did. I thought structurally it was incredibly solid. I loved the structure of this one. And I just loved what it did with those elements from Twin Peaks. Like, I've had a skim through a couple of articles on Twin Peaks as quickly as possible to try and catch myself up on that. And I think one of the things we were talking about before we started was how this story doesn't seem to use Twin Peaks elements in the same way that Twin Peaks does. Because I very much got the impression... I
mean, it might. We don't actually know that.
But the impression I got from reading is that Twin Peaks is very heavy on symbolism and metaphor, and using all these very surreal elements in a symbolic way. And this fic seems to, rather than doing that, build off of what Twin Peaks does and reuse those symbols as an opportunity to create surrealism. I think it was like an interesting flip from what I could tell. So I thought that was pretty neat, and Hat obviously strongly disagrees with me, and will probably tell us why right now.
Well, I just wasn't seeing anything in there. Like, you know, there's all this stuff in here which is probably obviously symbolic of something, but it's not like doing anything. Like this coffee scene where they get coffee and you're like, wow, this is good coffee. I'm like, okay, and then what? Like, what is this? Why is it important that it's good coffee? Like, why? I don't know. I mean, Dubs, do you know Twin Peaks? You should be telling us about this then.
Yeah, Dubs, don't just sit and chat. You have mic privileges.
I don't actually know anything about Twin Peaks. All I know is that the main character is always holding a cup of coffee.
If it turns out that you wrote this, I'm going to call you out on that so hard. I'm gonna
Where are you gonna call me out?
I don't know. I will call your cell phone and yell at you though, because yeah, I'm gonna do it. If it turns out you wrote this. What?
Try it.
I have your anyways.
Try it, I dare you.
Not right now. Yeah, so this, like, I mean, it's got all these symbolic elements in here, but it's not like doing anything with them. But they're obviously supposed to be symbolic. I mean, there's like all this gibberish that this guy talks, which, like, God, Quill, why did you ever introduce people to like U202 Plus character thing? Like,
I was so happy when I saw that.
Having backwards words in my fiction is not what I need from my fiction.
I loved it. It was great. I'm legitimately jealous of this author for finding a way to use that so much better than the shitty reason I did years ago.
But like,
oh, I'm so pleased. This is good. This is good feeling. I am. Everything is going right now. I feel like I made a good decision in the past. And everyone hates me for it. It's great.
Okay. Okay. But, like, you know, the person speaking gibberish and, like, all of the weird stuff he says, and then, like, the fact that it's, you know, like a sycamore tree, and then, like, there's all this about past and present and who I am and who you are, and, like, all of this stuff, like, it's going around and it's existing, but it's not, like, doing anything in this story. You know, I mean, it's good enough for flavor, I guess, but like the actual arc of this story is pretty anemic in my opinion. Like, Sunset gets dragged into this by Arya, and I'm still not entirely sure why she even goes along with it. And like, she goes along with it, obviously, and so there's probably a reason for it. I just feel like the author didn't like. So like, it might be pity. It might be because she's being like coerced into it. You know, it might be because. But the author doesn't like seem to settle on one. It just has her doing it because she's doing it, and that just kind of goes through the whole story. Like, this character has no agency. Like, she gets dragged into this thing, and they do this thing, and then someone hands her a cup of coffee, and then they do the other thing, and like everything that happens is her being told what to do, and she never really has like much choice in it. So like in that aspect, it's like a horror story. Like, you can do that in horror, right? You can have characters who have no agency. You can have characters that have awful things happen to them, and like horror, that's what it's about. But this doesn't read to me like a horror story. This reads like an adventure. Like, they go to a place and they do this momentous thing with like this person on this tree, and she fights this unicorn. Like, it's not. These aren't the sort of things like it's. I don't know. Like, the descriptions here are good. And the imagery is great, and I mean, I don't know how I can judge that, because apparently a lot of it is straight out of David Lynch's stuff, which makes it difficult to judge for me as a reader. It's like, okay, should I mark this up because it's great, or should I mark it down because it's like all borrowed? Or maybe it's not all borrowed. I guess I don't know how much of it is borrowed because I haven't watched Twin Peaks. I don't know. That makes it difficult for me to judge, but anyways, the imagery was not. I wasn't sold on the imagery by itself, I guess, and I wasn't seeing symbolism in it that I feel like it should have for how strong of imagery it is, I guess. I don't know. Quill apparently really enjoyed the symbolism, and he can tell you how that worked for him, or imagery, and he can tell you how that worked for him.
So I think a lot of the things that worked for me here is because I'm seeing them from a very different perspective than you are. Firstly, I saw this...
As per usual, which is why we make good podcasters, because we see things from very different perspectives.
I definitely saw this as horror, to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
I think it very much tries to be horror. I don't agree with you on the ending of this story, and I think we're going to have to dedicate a couple of minutes just to the ending,
okay,
because that's an important aspect of this conversation. But I think for me, yeah, the whole... Literally one of the points I wanted to make has just been brought up in chat. I'll get to that in a little bit. And apologies, that's going to have to be edited out in the recording. But yeah, there's a lot of cool stuff going on with the symbolism here. And I think one of the reasons it's cool is because it's using Twin Peaks symbolism not as symbolism. See, one of the things you were mentioning was how the symbolism felt hollow and didn't quite seem to do anything. I think that symbolism wasn't symbolism. I think it's borrowing the symbols from Twin Peaks, as best as I can tell, and using them to create a surreal atmosphere in the exact opposite way that Twin Peaks, it seems, creates a surreal atmosphere reliant heavily upon deep symbolism and metaphorical meaning. I think that fundamental emptiness of the symbolism gives it even more surrealism. And in all honesty, while that's really unsettling to read, that is really unsettling to read. And I think, in all honesty, you're describing an unsettling situation. I like being unsettled when you're describing an unsettling situation. Just as I like being happy when you're describing a happy situation. You know? So that's why the symbolism worked for me, because it didn't work. Which is a really stupid argument, but in this kind of case, you can see why I might want to make that.
All right. I mean, if you enjoyed it, you enjoyed it. Like, it's not like I can tell you, like, oh, you shouldn't enjoy this because it's... Yeah, I mean...
Yeah, I mean, for me, it just felt fundamentally creepy and surreal, and I think that was the whole point of the setting. It built the setting fantastically.
Or borrowed it fantastically, perhaps.
Yes, perhaps. I don't know the original setting well enough to know if this is completely borrowed or if it's, you know, building off of. And yeah, I like that word. I'm terrified to say your name because I'm going to pronounce it wrong.
Repurposed?
Repurposed is an excellent word for this. Repurposing setting. is exactly.
Yeah. Anyways, our disagreement on the ending. I felt like the characters here were presented as fundamentally fairly unchanged. Like they meet up again, and they don't act differently than in the beginning of the story. You know, they don't, like, they have the same sort of like kind of antagonistic back and forth. Like it's like they haven't changed at all, you know. And like after they've gone through, like, I would expect that to have some sort of change. I'd expect there to be like some difference in how they interact, like some sort of character arc, perhaps. I mean, I don't know. And I did not like that. That may have been because I kind of read this as like adventure with horror trappings, you know, like an adventure, like oftentimes it's not about like just surviving, right? You're setting out to do something, which is how I felt this was couched, right? Like, okay, they set out to do something, but you know, that was my take on it. But like, I didn't feel like they acted particularly different. And I actually missed the importance of the geode. Like, I haven't watched the fourth Equestria Girls movie, so I didn't know that the geode was like her link to magic or whatnot. Get over it, Dubs. Also, if you want to boo me in voice.
There, did it for you.
Yeah, but even then, like, if I'd known that, I actually would have expected it to be even more drastic. Like I would have expected their attitudes to be even more drastically different, right? Because, I mean, if they just got dragged through this thing at the end and there was like absolutely no actual consequences, then like, sure, the ending with them not being any different is still disappointing, but at least, like, okay, it makes some sense. But like, if there were actual consequences to this, like, you would expect them to treat each other differently. If there are like actually legitimately huge consequences to what just happened, the fact that they are acting normal in the end is like even worse in my opinion. Because, like, I mean, if I went on an adventure with someone and got my arm chopped off, like, I'd expect them to at least acknowledge it. Like, I don't know.
So,
I don't know.
The parallel I'm going to draw here, unfortunately obvious and awful though it may be, Lovecraftian horror is fundamentally built around the fear of not just the unknown, but the vast unknown. The idea that things are so far beyond our comprehension that attempting to understand them will drive us mad. And I think the important thing to take away from that genre is that sometimes things have such large consequences, such consequences beyond our ken, that we cannot possibly react to them. There is no reaction that we could have that is fitting, and so we don't. Things appear unchanged because that is these characters clinging to the fact that their lives are back to normal now, after what can only be described as an ordeal. And I think that is what made the ending work for me. Like, I didn't read this as characters having barely changed and having not gone through an arc. I saw this fundamentally as a very different reaction, a very different interaction, between characters than we saw at the beginning, disguised on a surface level as the same reaction. They're using that skin of antagonism, that mask of antagonism, to give themselves a sense of comfort. But beneath the surface, they're treating each other differently. They would not happily offer each other shitty coffee. Like, that's not something that would have happened at the start, but they're still antagonistic to each other because that's what is normal. And after what they've been through, to break normal any more than they have to acknowledge that something has changed, is too horrifying to contemplate. I think that was the arc as I saw it.
I feel like if the author wanted to sell me on that, they would have to sell me on this being actually like horror. And I guess, like, I'm just not I mean, I don't see that in the way Sunset acts. I don't see that in the way Adagio, in the way Arya acts. Like, they never seem like particularly terrified or scared or horrified. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I can see it, I guess. It's not the way I read it. But I could see it. Anyways, I think we've covered just about. I don't know. Is there anything else you specifically feel like you need to say about this one?
Just to bring up that point from chat that I said I would, about the parallels between the pendants breaking. Nothing more than to point it out, because it's something that's really just worth thinking on. It's a cool parallel, and it makes the it really makes the narrative come together nicely in that sense. It's a good structural device. I love it.
I'd like to point out that less than 2 minutes ago, Horizon posted his review of Garmonbozia on the site.
Oh goodness, catching up on reviews quickly. What have we missed?
Would you like to know what tier he gave it?
I have just
needs
seen.
work.
Tier almost there.
Almost there. Okay. Huh. Anyways, I'll have to read that later. But we should move on to the next story, perhaps, which is another one Quill has strong feelings about.
Is it named after a city?
It is, and perhaps also a theory in physics. Oh wait, no, metaphysics. Stop that, Quill. You're creeping me out.
Very angry about the title of this story. Okay, so
I think I actually have to apologize for that, because would you have noticed if I hadn't pointed it out?
I might have done, but I wouldn't be anywhere near as mad about it if I hadn't been explicitly told. So before I read this story, Hat came up to me and said, "Quill, you are going to hate this story." And when asked why, Hat pointed out that the title of this story is Copenhagen, which is, of course, a reference to the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics. The story is about the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics. Those are the two competing interpretations of quantum mechanics, the two major ones that are totally different and completely irrelevant to each other. Anyway, yeah, that's me being angry at this fic.
Yeah.
I'm back on track now.
I don't get it.
It's nerd rage.
Nerd rage. That's all it is.
Nerd rage.
I apologize for getting angry, author, but I am not happy with that title. Please change it. I might as well start us off on this one, I suppose, briefly. I think
we could make Dubs do it, because this is one of the ones he actually
read. Oh, that's true.
Right?
Dubs, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, do an intro.
This is a I hate. I want to talk about this, but I'm afraid that I'm going to sound really mean because
be unafraid, Dubs. It's okay. I will be meaner.
Welcome to.
I'm not going to lie. When I was done with this and I was writing my review, the first two things that popped in my head was A, this reads like Baby's first-person narrative, and B, this reads like Baby's first metafic.
Welcome to Radio Writeoff We Hate Everything edition.
And, I take it back. You're being meaner than I would.
So I really do. I apologize to the author for that. But I will say the reason that the first-person narrative thing stuck out to me was that the way it starts is with that, the first person narrator starts talking and is like, "Oh, apologies, I didn't introduce myself," and then they introduce themselves and they're like, "This is why I'm writing about this," and that's always so awkward, and it gives me flashbacks of when I first started writing first person narratives, and that was all I ever did.
Yeah.
So the reason you feel like it reads like Baby's first person narrative is because this is how your first one's read.
Because I'm a baby.
That's how my first one read as well. Now you point that out, that is.
It's just a very beginner's way of doing first person narratives.
Okay.
And it's always sort of awkward because it's sort of like in a third person narrative where if you were to take a paragraph to explain what your character looked like in detail and where they come from.
You have to have them stop in front of a mirror before they do that.
Dubs, I don't know what you're talking about. The opening paragraph of My Immortal is the pinnacle of third person fiction.
Yes. Thank you, Cool Gothic Scratch.
And then in terms of And then in terms of metafiction, it just sort of reminded me of like one of those fics where like someone's run out of time on the last day, so they just start writing a thing about the prompt. I mean, like, I've done that.
I've
That's
done
another
that.
thing I've done.
We've all done that.
They haven't actually done that, but
It's an experience. You have
in
to try
terms
it.
in terms of the metafiction itself, it's pretty basic. I think I know that at least YouTube. Apparently, it's gotten YouTube very angry.
I don't know about angry. I mean, I feel like there's a lot of... What this story does is it asks a lot of questions, I think. And that kind of gives it this feeling of like, oh, I'm so introspective and deep. But like, if you actually analyze it, none of these are really actually very interesting questions. And it doesn't actually present any interesting answers to them either. And then it also has like straw men, and I don't know. I was not impressed with the reasoning in here, I guess.
Speaking of Lovecraft, I do like how we referred to Lovecraft as the racist Lovecraft. that was one of my favorite parts of the fic.
Yeah, that did actually make me smile. I forgot that was in here. Yeah, I mean, I wasn't angry at the metafiction in this one. I didn't really see what it was trying to say. And given metafiction is, you know, a genre defined by trying to say things, that's not a good sign. I think, for me, the metafiction element was weak, but given the entire story is built upon that metafiction element, that really, really dragged it down.
I would actually dispute that. I feel like the ending part of this, like the where this horizontal line comes in, I feel like the ending part is actually entirely disconnected from the beginning part. Like, looking at the thread of narrative, it seems to me like what thread there is, like it kind of meanders around a lot, but it just kind of stops at this horizontal line, and then at the end, it's like the author looked at the word count and was like, oh crap, I need more words. So they just added like... you know, the end of the last part of the story here, because like they just I don't know, and maybe I'm wrong, perhaps that's unfair, but like I feel like the metafiction bit, like it's in the beginning a little bit, but then the ending, it's just like, nope, I'm just going to talk about how much we need to like love each other now because
it does become a social
Look,
commentary.
I'm fine with that. The ending would be fine with me if the rest of the piece matched the desperate tone. Because it starts out very relaxed and very kind of meandering, and then all of a sudden, like in the last like 10% of the story, it suddenly takes on that very desperate, like really choppy paragraphs, repeating stuff all the time. I also think the last line should be cut, because I would like it if it ended on I would like it if it ended on the repetition of please.
Yes, agreed.
Yeah.
That would be strong.
I also think that all the horizontal rules are unnecessary. I don't see their point because it doesn't seem like there's ever really a change in topic.
Yeah,
they would work okay as soft scene breaks, but yeah, I see what you mean. Like actually,
I can agree with that.
Yeah, that doesn't work.
In terms of the philosophy, the one part I did like was the part where I think the author, I don't know if the author did this purposely, but they end up like defending Christianity.
Oh yeah, I mean, well, the principles of Christianity, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, just the part where it's talking about, you know, we find ourselves wondering if it were only a natural explanation, then why is everything so rich, so extraordinary? For being so blessed with imagination, would this true universe be so dull? I did like that part, but that's personal reasons. I will agree that the rest of the philosophy just sort of all mashes together for me.
Yeah.
And I don't and no particular part of it really stands out to me as deep or thought-provoking.
Yeah.
So there's a passage I quoted in the podcast chat while I was reading this that I wanted to bring up here while we're talking about
the Brony and Equestria part.
Yeah, basically. There's a short passage which goes, after all, why us? Why not one of the myriad thousands of other worlds that have been created? How many of those worlds truly have heart to them? And it goes on to talk about capitalism or something, I don't know. And It does. It goes on to talk about capitalism.
Okay, sure. Yes.
And
Continue.
forgive me for being cynical, okay? I'm allowed to be cynical occasionally. But I have strong opinions about this passage, and I have strong opinions about it not being good. The reason I dislike this is it's the most stereotypical... I hate to say it, I'm going to have to say it. It's the most stereotypical brony thing I have ever heard. It's that statement that, oh, look at this one show that's special because it's got heart. And I'm sorry to be cynical, but frankly, yes, I know this show was created by someone who was very passionate about it and the world, and I think that's great, and it shows in the show. But it would not exist if Hasbro didn't think that it would draw in more bits, as the story puts it. The fact of the matter is, whether or not these shows have heart is completely irrelevant to their existence. I don't think it's that actually important. I think it tries to put the show far, far higher on a emotionally creative pedestal above
I don't
its
think
competition than you
I don't think
reasonably
that your point is mutually exclusive to the story's point, personally.
No, maybe not. Maybe not, but I think my objection isn't that the point is wrong. My objection is that it's almost a little naive and just the stereotype about this fandom that I dislike the most, I guess. Apart from
I think that it's... I think it's less putting the current show on a pedestal and more putting Care Bears, 80s Transformers in the trash.
I can see that. But
I don't think it's saying that the show isn't, a capitalist attempt to get money. But it's saying at least if it's a capitalist attempt to make money, at least it does have some care put into it, as opposed to shows which are made sort of like from a very basic template by underpaid animators in South Korea trying to make just pure money with no real effort put into it or no real care for any sort of fan base behind it.
And yet, what does artistic integrity have to do with the many worlds hypothesis for the likelihood of something actually existing? Like,
Look,
genuinely.
Well, I think we've already agreed that this piece meanders quite a bit.
Yes. I'm sorry, it's just a bit silly for me, that point.
Can I offer a more concrete criticism?
Of course.
Please.
So one of the big things I mentioned in my I mentioned this in my review was that Luna makes all of these very broad philosophical statements and sort of judgments on people, like, talking about, like destructive people, selfish rulers, even what we just quoted, the sort of cynical cash grabs. And yet she speaks so broadly that she never actually cites anything. There's nothing that we can ever actually grab onto aside from just like the vague idea that these things exist. There's another part where she talks about like how she can't die because she and Celestia are so burdened with some sort of knowledge. But at the same time, she never actually says what that knowledge is. She just sort of vaguely, this vague, ominous like knowledge we have, this vague, ominous divinity we have. I think that it would be much easier to grasp onto the piece and also remember the points that Luna was making if we got some concrete examples of what the hell she's actually talking about.
Right, that was actually part of my problem with the way the fic was delivered, because it's delivered as if Luna is talking, right?
Yeah.
But, I personally see Luna as someone who's, having lived 1,000 years and been through what she is, like, ought to be fairly wise and, like, understanding in things. And this doesn't read as, like, someone who knows philosophy and is trying to make a cogent point. And that kind of threw me out, because, like, I would expect that of Luna. Like, I feel like she's the sort of person you could sit down with and, like, have a meaningful discussion about the meaning of life with. And this just, the fact that it didn't feel meaningful to me, I was like, I can't believe this is supposed to be Luna talking. And I don't know. That's difficult, I guess, to deal with, because I mean, if you're writing entertainment, it's different from writing philosophy, right? But, if you're trying to write entertainment that looks like philosophy, or trying to write philosophy that looks like entertainment, you're going to have some overlap there, I guess.
Well, I think it's interesting how a lot of her points seem like they sort of. I think that a lot of her points do come from sort of the viewpoint of an immortal. Like the one I remember, there was one point she makes. She says, "But yes, take false comfort in foolish beliefs like merit and hard work and other nonsense." And that did seem like a very like above it all thought to have. Like
Sure.
it's like someone who doesn't actually have to work and has just sort of been blessed with this for such a long time,
Sure.
and then is able to talk about your world has failed in these ways, and so I actually did think that fit Luna's viewpoint of like someone who's disconnected from it all and has lived for
Sure.
so long that she's just so desperate to like see people stop fucking each other up. And if that is true, if that is what the author is going for, then I think that desperation we start to see at the end needs to penetrate the piece more.
Yeah.
Because as is the desperation that I think they're trying to get across early on is too hidden, and then the desperation that they try and portray at the end comes on too suddenly.
Interesting.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I think ultimately, I think we all agree that as is, this story does not hold very much water, but it could do. Not to say that it wouldn't require a bit of work, quite a bit of work, in fact. But I
will
think
say
it could be pretty decent.
I will say I currently have 3 stories judged on my slate, and Copenhagen is at number 1.
Do I want to know which stories you've ranked lower than Copenhagen?
Well, I'm guessing that one of them is the next story we're supposed to discuss, because...
What story is that? Depends on what it is.
Oh, wait, no.
I think the next one's the one that Dubs hasn't read, isn't it?
Yes,
Yeah.
that's correct, because, anyways, so...
Oh, it's this one.
One of them would be Luna. This is one we haven't actually discussed beforehand. So why don't you tell me what you think about it, Quill?
Wait, what fic is
this
it?
is Familiar.
Familiar.
Oh,
It's
okay.
familiar.
So, Familiar. Okay, I'm going to start off by saying I like this story. And then I'm going to say a lot of things that make it sound like I don't like this story. And I want you all to understand that when I say things like, this story made me deeply uncomfortable, I want you to know that that's coming from a place of love and cherishing this story. And it really made me deeply uncomfortable.
Well, I guess it's doing something right then. I mean,
I think
You
it
want
was
to talk about
intended
deeply uncomfortable? Read the story where Blueblood masturbates on Sweetie Belle.
Is that
I'll
what?
pass.
Which is
Thanks.
third on my slate, by the way.
Wait, is that actually what that story's about?
Yeah, Blueblood's greatest love.
Oh, okay, I hadn't read that one.
Okay, to be fair, he doesn't.
Maybe put that
to
one
be fair.
aside for now.
To be fair, he
Staining.
doesn't masturbate onto her. He masturbates onto a chair, which she then sits on and gets pregnant from.
What?
Moving right along.
That? I hate this band. No.
I believe we're not talking about that story this round, though. So yes.
Yes, Familiar.
Dubs, I just gotta say, that's right up there with after we read that one story, you were like, so the correct interpretation is totally
That's
she
what
slept
it was
with his
about.
mom, right?
That's what it was about.
Which story was this?
That was the one where the guy fucked his mom.
The what?
Anyways.
That was not derailing that. That was what it was about.
I'm gonna have to go back and look at that story.
Yes.
Anyway, yes,
but
Familiar.
Moving right along.
Familiar is really, really creepy, and I think it's intended to be really creepy. I would really hope it's intended to be really creepy, because there's a lot of deeply disturbing undertones to this story that are never fully explored, and I think they're sort of meant to be left like that. This story is about the AI being treated as slaves, like really, actually sentient AI being treated as slaves, and that freaks me out. But it's also a really cool premise for a story. which makes me feel like a shit person to say. I like a lot of people have really, really had a go at this piece for its opening and for the way it deals with the theme of suicide. And while I can see the point, and I kind of agree with the point in some ways, I definitely don't have as strong feelings about the suicide as other people have commented, which is a bit odd for me. I usually have strong feelings about suicide in stories. I think it was... The suicide itself was dealt with... I mean, having read the comments before I read the story, I was expecting much worse. The suicide itself dealt with in a very respectful manner, I felt. And is as used to explore the stress, the absolute stress that this story places its characters in, that this world places its characters in. I thought it was an interesting choice. I thought it was a good, solid thing to base the story off. I disagree with the people who say that it was unnecessary on the basis that it is the thread that drives this story forward, and I think it is an interesting one. Do I think it's well executed as a thread? No, I think it could be dealt with better. I think it could be tied in more strongly. On the simple basis that, as is, it kind of reads like, okay, Cloud Chaser's killed herself. That is the story. We're going to use it. It felt very synthetic in that sense. I think that could be worked in a little more organically. I know that criticism. I'm sorry for giving really what's the word? Like, not particularly strong criticism, like not helpful criticism. This is me just saying words that aren't actually going to help you make it better. But
I could talk about that for a minute, because that was my primary criticism with the story, was the motivations behind the suicide and how it plays out in the story. Because you're right, you've got this like AI being treated as slaves, but like the way the suicide works and the way that the AI is represented later does not feel compatible to me, because you know, they've got like these goals and they've got like the way they work, you know, towards them, right? So they've got like a certain amount of free will, but they've also got these goals. And like, I just can't reconcile the way the amount of freedom the AI is given with the suicide. You know, I don't think the restrictions that the AI seems to be on lines up with the amount of freedom that they're given and the goals they have, I guess. Like, does that make sense? Like, the way Twilight acts, the way Celestia acts, does not line up with the way Cloud Chaser acts.
Yeah, no, I can absolutely see that, and I see why how the story
so,
tries
like,
to justify it isn't quite strong enough for me.
Yeah. See, now, and if you take Cloud Chaser's actions as being within the constraints of the system, then Twilight's and Celestia's actions aren't. And if you take Twilight and Celestia's actions as being within the constraints of the systems, then Cloud Chaser's aren't. You know, you can't have both of these happening in the same story, in my opinion. That's what got me about it.
See, I think the main problem here is that there is so much world building left out. Like, I'm not usually a fan of saying things like, "Oh, this was far too big an idea for the number of words." It wasn't. You can always tell this kind of story in however many words you want to use. I think whether it'll turn out good or not is an entirely different question, but you can fundamentally tell that complete story and build that complete world. I think not enough attention was given to the world building of just quite how these AI function in society and quite what their limits are, because without that knowledge, like you say, things don't quite seem to work. They don't quite seem to be internally consistent, and it feels like we're missing some world building there, to me.
Right, yeah, that is basically what it comes down to, is something about the world building is either missing or conflicting. And I mean, I'm currently reading it as conflicting. If the author has something that they could bring in that would make that not conflict, well then, I mean, great, you know, that's even better. But as it is, to me, it currently reads as conflicting, which I have trouble getting behind, I guess. But, you know, when you talked about it being a creepy story, you know, I realized perhaps if that conflict was put in there in order to make it creepy, like I could see it working. Like if the idea is that there's actually more going on here, and that this justification that Rainbow is given at the end or whatnot is legitimately incorrect, I could see that being creepy. I don't know if that's the way it was intended or not, but when you said this story was very creepy, I thought, well, maybe it was written to be creepy, and that's part of it. I could see that. I don't know if I would agree with that, but I could see
So
that.
one of the things that really creeped me out in this fic, I did full disclosure before we start, I am generally one of the... I'm part of the school of thought that dislikes the use of rape as a narrative device without incredibly good reason and incredibly well exploring the effects that has on a victim. I think it is such a sensitive and important subject. And while I would never say to an author, don't write something in this way, your artistic integrity is far more important than that, I will say it's something that's always worth bearing in mind as authorial responsibility. The fact that this fic deals with rape in the way it does, in all honesty, I think it was used incredibly well to do what it was intended to do, which is presumably, and I really hope it was intended to be this, is to creep us out and help us build that sense that, firstly to build Dash's character as very self-centered and definitely not seeing these sentient beings as anything more than slaves who are there to do her bidding. That is definitely built with that. But it does also deeply deeply unsettling things about the society that this world has fostered. And I don't know if it's meant to also say some things about whether it's meant to be an actual social commentary as well. It could be. It very easily could be. I don't quite know if that was intended. But in all honesty, that scene really came close to seriously freaking me out. But like I say, if that was the intention, I cannot fault that. That's working as intended. But yeah, it was sure. Very emotional for me to read, rather than actually because it was emotional writing. It wasn't emotional writing, and I think that's what made it emotionally challenging to read.
Sure. Well, I think I've hit upon my large problems with this, I guess. The world building felt a little dense to me. It mostly worked, I think. But it just felt a little bit... And the beginning's got this weird, it starts with Cloud Chaser and then switches to Dash. I don't know. There's a couple little things in there, I guess.
I will tell you one thing that stands out. Important, just general write-off guidelines. Horizontal line breaks exist for a reason. Please use them. Thank you.
Do they, Quill?
This has been a public service announcement.
What do they exist for, Quill?
They exist to not be 30 asterisks on a line by themselves. In all seriousness,
not even
we laugh, but
center aligned.
We laugh, but author, probably worth trying to make a change like that for anonymity reasons in future
different
rounds.
Amounts of.
I didn't because they're usually so far separated. Are they actually different numbers? Oh my god, they are.
Yeah, they are different amounts.
Oh my god, they are. This is. I can't deal with this.
Wait, they get longer and longer. Maybe the amount of asterisks increasing is no, they keep getting longer. Maybe it's symbolizing something.
Oh shit! Longer?
Is that intentional? I actually no. There's one that gets shorter. There's one that gets shorter. It's okay.
Well, maybe that's intentional too.
I hate when
Nerd
people point
sniping,
something out
folks.
and it's like, this might be intentional, and I'm like, I actually have to seriously consider it. That is when I get upset.
Nerd sniping.
They're supposed to.
Okay.
They're supposed to represent your will to live.
Ooh.
Ooh, edgy for a story dealing about
Okay.
suicide.
Oh, I shouldn't have said. I shouldn't have said that in a story about suicide. I didn't realize that.
Dark humor. Moving onwards.
All right. Shall we move on to the poetry one?
Yeah.
Dubs definitely
Yeah.
has things to say about this one.
Do I?
Which is the poetry one.
I mean,
you wrote a lot
I
of
was
things
sort
about
of.
this one.
I was sort of hesitant when so backstory. Hat asked me to narrow down our results to decide what fics we were going to talk about, and of course the only two fics I had read that we had on the list were this one and Copenhagen, so I had to pick those. But I feel sort of bad because Luna upon Sulva already has 13, 14 comments. So I feel like what I'm going to be saying here is mostly just
most of them are
A fair
me
amount
and
of that was, yeah, a fair amount of that was me and Quill going back and forth on the pacing does not reflect the events. The pacing does reflect the events. The pacing does not reflect the events.
Still.
The pacing does reflect the events.
Still, it's a lot more discussion than a lot of other fics have gotten. And
That's
I feel like most of what I say here is just going to be a rehash of my review. Because I sort of, I'm going to toot my own horn here. That review I gave for Luna upon Sulva was the best review I ever get in any write-off fic. That's like the most effort I've ever put into a review on this goddamn site.
Wow.
Um,
Work harder, Debs.
well, here. So how about this? I started Copenhagen. So Quill, why don't you start this one?
Okay. So, like I said and Dub said in our respective reviews, line endings.
Line breaks.
Oh my god, line breaks. Everything about line endings is just no. So basically,
Wow,
free
Quill,
verse.
you've really come around on this one. I mean, really. When I first read this, and then I was telling Quill about it, and I said my biggest complaint about it is I don't like the line breaks, and then Quill was like, "Oh, they're not that bad." And then he sent me
They're
one.
us.
He sent me one. And he was like, "This is a really good one." I was like, "I don't know about that."
See, for me at the
Poetry
time,
fight,
I was only
poetry
about
fight.
halfway through, and I was sort of averaging how much I enjoyed the line breaks at that point. I was like, okay, there have been some terrible ones, but there have also been some pretty good ones. Now I'm sort of feeling the terrible outweighs the good a little more than I did at the time. Like, the thing is, free verse, so much of it hinges on line breaks, you know?
Yes.
It's such an important part of the form that if you don't get that right, you're kind of not getting the form right at all.
I mean, I wouldn't say I wouldn't say that you're not getting the form right. I'd say it's that you're wasting a great opportunity in your poetry.
Yeah, that's exactly the right way to put it. I think the beauty of line breaks is that they allow you to completely change how things are stressed, how things are focused.
Hell yeah.
I mean, just the way that people read sentences.
My favorite thing to do in line breaks is when people create double meaning in their line breaks through the way they end their sentences. In my review, I gave one or two examples of how I thought some of them should be changed, but I gave some examples of ones I thought were good. I mean, just a very quick one I liked was it's just one line. Or sorry, I guess this is a 3-liner, and it goes, "Perhaps she would turn her eyes on you and then break. If so, break. You would know what it is like not to be seen, not to be." I really like that. I really like that in terms of the repetition of the sort of the 2-syllable repetition of "and then, if so." There's a great cadence there, and then at the very end where it ends, not to be seen, not to be. If you go to the next line after that, there's a continuation of that sentence. But by ending it right there, not to be seen, not to be, it creates this implicit link between being seen and existing, which is a really, really great line break right there.
Mm-hmm. That is a fantastic bit of it. That's one of the bits I loved.
I think that was the one you sent me, actually.
It's the one I sent you. Although I didn't include that last line break in it. I was a bit too busy nerding out over the if so on its own line. But yeah, I think being able to create meaning in that way, to be able to do something that prose can't, it is such a fundamentally important tool in free verse and in poetry in general.
And you can use line breaks in prose.
Oh yeah,
but at the same time, not necessarily in the same exact way.
Yeah, if you start using them in the exact way, you're basically writing poetry. You're going to yell at me for saying that. Poetry is just prose with line breaks, but someone has to pretend to believe it, otherwise we haven't got a proper podcast about poetry. No, in all seriousness, I think it's such an important tool for poetry. Like, it does so much. A good line break creates meaning, it creates stress, it does all these things we've been talking about.
Your line breaks can make or break a poem.
Precisely.
Ooh,
if you
breaks and breaks, I get it.
I didn't even mean that.
Line breaks can line break.
I didn't mean that.
You didn't really.
I really didn't. I didn't even think about that, and I've been saying that for 3 days now.
Level up your puns.
To finally bring my point to a close after all this time. I think the point is that if you're given a tool that's as powerful as a line break can be, and you just don't use it, like the way this poem uses it is, in a lot of places, is just like, okay, my line's getting a bit long, gonna hit enter.
Or they're breaking it on their sentences.
Yeah, on the sentences or on the punctuation. Which is, that's a very standard thing to do in free verse, but it's not a very interesting thing to do in free verse. You've already got a break there. Why are you putting more break in?
Yeah. One of the comments I made was there's a 2-line or 2 lines that he has, and if you were to take away that line break, it wouldn't matter at all because they're just sentences.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the point is, if you're not going to use the tool of line breaks,
then you don't deserve them.
I'm beginning to think we've talked about line breaks.
Yes, line breaks are important to me and Dubs.
This is Hat saying we need to move this along.
Well, fine then. Let's talk about the narrative of the piece, which, to be fair, didn't jump out at me either. It seemed I like the look inside of Luna's psyche, and sort of how you can see she has this sort of vague, threatening tone, but at the same time. Something that I know Andrew Rogue mentioned about the pacing, which I guess also you two argued about a little bit, was that there was something about the pacing, and there was something about just the verse itself that even if there was a narrative, I just couldn't interest myself in it.
I would say I think a fair amount of that, for me at least, comes down to the weight of the description versus the amount of meaning that's in it. It's especially egregious in the first section, which is rather long. And I pointed out to Quill that there is like 63 some lines of poetry between the first line and the answering piece of dialogue down here. And there's stuff that goes on in there. I mean, don't get me wrong. There is content in there. There's just not enough content for the amount of words that are spent, in my opinion. And that might be me misunderstanding some of what's going on here. I've never claimed to be particularly good at poetry. But, there's a lot of description, and the description's alright, I guess. I feel like the description could be a little bit stronger. In general, I say things... I don't know. I have opinions about description, and I can't always back them up.
Well, what are your opinions?
It should be snappy. It should be snappy enough. And this just doesn't feel snappy to me. And there's some things, and this is something that kind of happens all through the piece, is we have bits that feel like they should be important because they take something and they reverse it, or they juxtapose it, or they do something that looks interesting with it. But I wasn't picking up on what it's supposed to mean, which makes it difficult for me to follow along, because it just feels like flash, there's a line in the first bit that says, to say in short what horror compares to love without expectation. This seems like it's something that should be powerful, but as far as I can tell, what it's saying is unconditional love is horrific. And that seems like nonsense to me. And I don't know why the author is saying it that way.
Yeah. Because like
it's
that
not
that
nonsense.
That concept, unconditional love, is horrific. That could be such a good concept if you do it right.
Exactly.
It
could be
idea,
extremely strong.
Like that idea of needing to forgive everything a partner does, like no matter how awful it is. I think that would be a really engaging thing to track, but I don't think that it goes very well here.
Exactly, yeah. I mean, that was one. Another one that stuck out to me was, if I can find it now. Okay, yeah. War came, and with it all the woes that flesh is sadly heir to. Famine, plague, and victory, death's fellow travelers. Now, victory in there is a very interesting choice.
Yeah.
And that's something that, like, could be interesting and could be powerful, I think. I just don't see the author doing anything with it.
Yeah.
And maybe that's me. But it kind of gave this, like, I felt like there was a lot of loose ends in here. Or the fact that there is explicitly a narrator in this poem. Like, the narrator actually talks to you, like, okay, again, I speak only what I'm told and have only that to offer, or just so I'm told. There's explicitly a narrator in this poem, but they just kind of drop out. Like,
Yeah.
after the first section and the couple paragraphs after that, like, they just sort of vanish. And I don't know, like, I mean, I think it would be neat if we knew what the author was trying to do with that. And I don't. I mean, again, perhaps this is my missing something the author put in. Like, I did abstain on this, and I think I'll continue to abstain on this because I don't feel like
put it at the
I
bottom
know
of your
how
slate.
to rank it.
Can we jump back
Oh, that's
for a
harsh,
second?
Dubs.
God, I fucking hate it when people abstain on shit. Just put it at the bottom of your slate. Just get over it.
No, but that's the thing. See, I don't... I mean, it just feels like too much work to judge it, really. Like, it's just me being lazy. So, okay, you can be mad at me for being lazy, but I don't think it deserves to be at the bottom of my slate. I don't think it deserves to be at the bottom of my slate, is what I'm saying.
God, the author... if the author is listening, they must be like, shut the fuck up, Dubs. Stop talking.
Yep. Probably. Anyways, you were trying to say something,
Back a
Quill.
little way to that quote that you just quoted that I completely skipped over in my first reading.
What?
All the woes that flesh is sadly heir to. That's a reference.
Ooh.
That's Hamlet's soliloquy.
Ooh. Okay.
The 1,000 natural shocks that flesh is heir to is from the Hamlet soliloquy.
Okay.
And this has got me wondering whether there's anything else in here that's referencing things.
Well, one of these comments said that the title is a reference to Caliban upon Satabos, which is also apparently a reference to The Tempest by Shakespeare.
Yes, I can... Yeah. There's
I believe
Shakespeare in here? Is there a lot of Shakespeare in here? Or am I missing some Shakespeare?
I have no idea. I mean... Arbol is, I believe, a reference to C.S. Lewis. I don't know about Sulva. I googled that one and I found like a World War II landing or something.
Yeah, what's
and then also some Hindu Vedas or something for like the construction of fire altars. Which, yeah.
Can we go back to what is Arbol? Because I googled both spellings and I couldn't find anything.
I believe it's...
Yeah, so I'm pretty sure Abrol is... I'm pretty sure Abrol... there's one of them is a misspelling, I'm pretty sure. Because it's in the poem like 3 times, and one time it's once, and twice it's the other.
Arbol, I looked up, and is like Spanish for tree or something.
It is, but it's also in C.S. Lewis's space trilogy as the solar system. The field of Arbol is literally what he calls the solar system. Because they're like it, yeah.
Well, who here reads C.S. Lewis
And stuff. Me.
I don't know. I'm staring at groaning gray agony. He seems like the kind of guy who would read C.S. Lewis.
Huh.
I have read C.S. Lewis, but it's been a very long time.
Yeah, but I know.
I recommend everyone should because C.S. Lewis is great.
But Quill, I know which one you wrote now. So it's.
This is fair. Dobbs is.
And I'm gonna reveal it on the podcast.
No.
Oh man. That would just be a huge dick move.
No, it'd be hilarious because no one would know if Dobbs was faking out or not.
That's true.
I would
actually.
react as if he wasn't,
Williams,
and then it would be hilarious when he was actually naming a completely different fic.
William Antonelli is a fraud. We have established this.
Just like I do whenever you guys discuss my fics.
It's true. Okay, so yeah, things about this poem. I think the description could be a little tighter, maybe. Although I guess that's perhaps just me. As I said, I couldn't get into Caliban upon Cetabos either. Like I looked it up and I was like, bleh, you know. So poetry is just not my thing. I don't know if that's something the authors should actually listen to or not. But yeah,
think that I know we have our disagreements about the pacing of this poem.
what?
Yes, you act as if this is a surprise. We have very strong disagreements about the pacing of this fic. I think I absolutely
Perhaps.
agree with you that things could be tighter in terms of the description. Like, I don't want it to go faster, but I want it to have more content for the speed that it goes at. I think it's... Like, repetition is a fantastic tool in poetry and in prose.
Fantastic.
And thank you.
Shut up, Dubs.
I love a good bit of repetition. Everyone knows I'm addicted to bookends, so you know I love repetition. But I think this poem overuses it to the point where it lacks meaning.
Okay.
And yeah, I'd rather see more content than repetition that doesn't add anything.
I can't say for sure why this narrative doesn't interest me, which I feel bad about. Maybe it's just because I'm not a big fan of sort of flowery, archaic language or like stuff like that, or sort of like. I guess I wouldn't say archaic language. More like overly poetic language. It sounds
poetry license revoked.
It sounds like a poem that would be written in the 16th, 17th, 15th centuries, which I don't fuck with.
Okay.
Yeah, see, that's what's really weird about it. It's got that phrasing and that sort of diction of
and yet it's free verse.
Old 18th, and yet it's free verse. I think that's really curious, if anything. I don't know how I feel about that. But if it's referencing Shakespeare any more than it already is, I think this is something I need to spend a lot more time with.
There's also like 2 or 3 biblical references in here at least. I mean, it definitely has the references, so that's kind of neat. I don't know, I felt like as far as the narrative goes, it doesn't evolve fast enough for me.
Yeah.
I felt like a lot of this was Luna going, uh-huh, and Celestia going, nuh-uh.
Yeah, the argument didn't exactly seem to move on at any point in the story until the end. Which didn't exactly help my argument that the pacing
really
should be
not really sure what the ending is doing. Did any of you have a feeling on what the ending was doing?
I skimmed the ending. Please don't judge me.
I think she called Celestia a bitch.
Okay.
She did.
Yeah, maybe.
She did. I'm pretty sure that's actually in the poem.
Well, it says time, you bitch. So unless Celestia has time.
Yep.
Time, you
Celestia's
bitch.
time
Learn this.
confirmed.
Long ago we had some trials, and mine was Sulva, to live among the living here. My burden was to watch them die. My burden was to lead them. That's a really bad line break right there.
And we're back to line
I was going to
breaks.
say, Celestia is the sun, and the sun interacts with sundials to create time, therefore Celestia is time. But did either of you have anything you needed to say about this? Did either of you have anything you need to say about this besides line breaks? Because we're going on like I think an hour and a half.
Quotation marks.
Get rid of the quotation marks. They suck.
Okay.
I don't think that you need to do the indents like some people have suggested. But the quotation marks suck.
Actually, if I remember correctly, I glanced at the text of this one and it had some indents in it.
Ooh, so you're saying this is Roger's fault?
It might be. Let me double check this.
Roger. In all seriousness.
Yeah, these look okay. Take a look at this and tell me if you think this is because I'm not entirely sure what these line breaks are doing, or indents are doing, but it looks like there's indents in there that I don't see in the story.
Oh God.
Oh yeah, look at that.
So, ooh.
Oh.
Ooh.
So I don't know what this is doing, but there are indents in here that I'm not seeing in the story, which makes me wonder like what caused that.
I need to reread this with the indents.
I don't
Okay.
care enough to reread it with the indents.
Wait, are the indents just... No, they're not. What?
And they're not
Yeah.
connected to they're not all connected to the quotation marks.
Not all of them are. No, they're not.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. See, I don't know what the indents are doing, but there are indents
Hat, what
there
is
that
this
I didn't see
witchcraft?
in the story. I mean,
A lot of them are on lunar dialogue, but not all of them.
you just look at the text. Just look at the text version of the story.
So, yes,
Like, if you go to the gallery, it's got-
I know that hat.
Okay, so what are you asking me about? that?
I was accusing you of messing with the indents.
Oh. No, I'm not that adept.
But yeah, I think that was my thoughts. In all seriousness, punctuating quotation marks in poetry, I don't know how other people do it, but I would usually treat a stanza as the equivalent of a paragraph rather than a line break as the equivalent of a paragraph in that case.
Yeah.
As the way this fic is done.
I sort of agree with that, yeah.
It's just easier on the eyes, for one thing. So yeah, that would be my big suggestion for a really quick, simple tidy that will make this so much easier to read.
Yeah, I agree. I went to the guessing page to put down Groaning Grey Agony as the person who wrote this, but it turns out he actually didn't write a fic this round. So I'm putting it down as Jorg, because whatever.
They both begin with a G.
All right.
Yeah.
That's basically the same person. All right. I think that's everything, isn't it? Do we have any?
I believe that's everything.
Does anyone have any fics they want to just mention and say nice things about as recommendations?
Have you guys done your slates?
I have.
Why don't you talk a little bit about whatever's at the top of your slates or bottom of your slates, if you want to do that?
Okay, but let's be quick. Well, I don't know. I guess people don't seem to mind. Because when we did that poll about how long the Writeoff podcast should be, everyone was like, just do it as long as you want. So I guess we just keep going, I guess. Yeah, I've got Severe Weather Appreciation Week at the top of my slate, because that story was just really solid in a lot of ways.
I heard that one had some nice run-on sentences.
It does start with this kind of like stream of consciousness run-on thing in the beginning with like Rainbow Dash, like kind of sort of it like, you know, modeling like her attention as it like, you know, zips around the room and stuff. That was kind of neat. It kind of dropped it out at the end, which I was a little disappointed about. Like, it has it in the beginning, and it surprised me a little, but it also kind of worked because it kind of was like, okay, I can see Rainbow Dash thinking like this. But then like it just kind of dropped it, and I was like,
so would you say it's like? Would you say it lost its narrative voice, or did the narrative voice just like evolve?
I mean, narrative voice.
Isn't that what you're talking about here?
I guess.
I'm sorry if I'm
I don't know.
using too many big words for you, Hat.
Yes, make them shorter. Narrative. Anyways. Yeah, I don't know if I'd say it evolved or lost it. I would say it was different at the beginning of the end, and that kind of bothered me. I don't know. Yeah. It seemed fairly natural at the time, but looking back, I was like, hey, why did it change?
Yeah. I haven't read that one yet, unfortunately. I mean to, though. I think it's on my slate.
Yeah, I recommend it. It's pretty decent. The middle felt a little long to me, but that might just be because I wasn't sure what the author was doing with it. Because there is stuff in there. It's just like did not all feel super plot-driven and necessary, which I mean is not always bad either.
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess. Yeah. Did you have one you wanted to talk about, Belle?
I had two brief mentions, I think. I think I've already made it clear that I really liked both of these stories. But I just wanted to very quickly say that, like, use this opportunity to say, Don't Leave Me With Myself and BraQuest were both very entertaining stories that I enjoyed a great deal.
I should read Don't Leave Me With Myself, because people keep mentioning that one.
It's a good story.
I haven't read that one. I read BraQuest.
BraQuest is also excellent. I'm a big fan.
Yeah,
both of them.
Broadcast was pretty entertaining. I don't know if I'd go so far as
Yeah.
excellent, but it was pretty entertaining.
BroadQuest, I mean, I already wrote the review, so you can read the review if you really want to see my detailed thoughts. I thought it was funny, but I like reading about EQG Limestone. Coffee Minion, I helped him write a long fic about EQG Limestone, so I've always sort of had a soft spot for her after that. And I really like the setting of it being like right when sunset goes through the portal, but at the same time,
that was clever. Yeah.
What I don't think it's very or entirely, I don't think it's very memorable. I guess I don't see myself like putting this down as like one of those fics I'll be thinking about for a very long time and like going back to.
No, I agree. I'm definitely just calling it out now to say, yeah, this was something that made me smile.
It made me smile too.
Yeah, I think that was really worth it. It set out to do something, and it did it.
I read it while I was eating a pulled pork sandwich.
Aww. That you remember that.
All right. I think we've covered everything we need to cover.
Just in time for Horizon to pop in to listen.
Yes. You guys good?
Yep.
I'm doing pretty good.
Right.
I'm not mad anymore.
That's amazing.
Good.
I'm glad to hear it.
This has been Radio Writeoff True Colors. Thank you all for listening, and we'll catch you next time.